Lo was 6 years old, and Lo was blind. And he lived with his father and mother in a very, very small village in China many years ago. And one morning, Lo's father, who was very cruel, came up to Lo and said, "Lo, you are no longer of value to our house. You cannot work, and you're old enough now to be on your own." And he threw little Lo out of the house. And the only thing that Lo had was a big tall pole that he used to feel his way around. And he had a little dog named Fan. Oh, Fan was such a cute little dog. But not only was he cute, Fan was very, very smart. And by snapping his fingers, Lo could get Fan to get down on his little front paws and bow his head to the ground. And that was what the Chinese called a kowtow, or a sign of respect. And so when Fan would do that while Lo was trying to beg for money, passers-by would be so taken by Fan that they would drop a coin or two into Lo's hat. So this was a difficult time for Lo, because now he was on his own and he was a beggar, and he had no place to sleep at night, and he had to, throughout the day, forage for food for both himself and Fan. And he could not see. And one evening, it was very late, and typically, Lo would sleep in the village. Sometimes there were shelters for the poor that he could sleep in, but this particular evening, he had been out all day, and he ended up in the forest. And so with Fan's help and his pole, he finally found off of the path a tree that he leaned against, and the shade of the tree comforted him, and he went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Lo had a dream. A figure approached him in the dream and said, "Lo, can you see me?" And Lo in the dream said, "No, I can't see you. I'm blind. But could you help me? Because you must be some kind of a fairy or a spirit. Could you, return my sight, restore it to me?" And the voice in the dream says, "No, I can't do that, Lo, but I can help you find a way to get your sight back." And the figure in the dream told Lo that every time he did a good deed, no matter how small, there would be a slight glimmer of light that would appear. And if he continued to do good deeds for long enough, finally his sight would be restored. But the voice also said, "Lo, if you do a bad deed to anyone or anything, twice of the light that you have gained will be lost to you." Well, when Lo woke up the next morning, he said, Fan, I had this wonderful dream, and maybe it's true, and if it is, perhaps I will get my sight back. And so that day, they didn't think more about it, but they went along back to the village to begin begging for today's food. And on the way, they ran into a beggar who was sitting at the side of the road. And the beggar said, "Oh, please help me. I'm blind and I cannot see." And Lo said, "Well, I'm sorry. I'm blind too." But then the old man said, "But I'm also crippled. As you can see, I cannot walk." Well, without thinking, Lo reached into his pocket, and there was one tiny copper, and he gave it to the blind man. And almost immediately, there was a flash of light. Oh, it was so dim, but Lo said to Fan, "Fan, maybe this will work." That evening, they went to the shelter, and they only had one crust of bread to share between them. But there was a little old lady in the corner of the shelter. She said, "Oh, I am so hungry. Could you share your food with me?" And Lo broke up the pieces of bread, and he gave one small piece to Fan, and he gave the other piece to the little old lady. And then he went into the corner, and he and Fan slept. Well, the next morning, when it was light, Lo walked out of the shelter, and there was more light coming in. He could see some flashes of light. It was stronger than it had been the night before. And he was so excited, but they were desperately hungry. And then all of a sudden, Fan came running back to them, ruff, 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 and he waved in his mouth a live chicken that apparently he had found running around the village. Wow! Lo was so excited that he immediately took the chicken and he took it to the market, and he was able to sell it for 4 coppers. And that was money that they could use for their food. But the light that had been in Lo's eyes disappeared, and he realized that he had taken someone else's chicken. And he went through the village for the rest of the day, asking people if they had lost a chicken. And he worked all day, but he never found anyone who had lost it. But that night, his vision began to come back because of what he had done. Well, this went on days, even weeks. And Lo would do a good deed in his light when his eyes would come back, and then something would happen. He was collecting a lot of coins because he knew if he's got his sight back, he would probably need to have glasses. So he began to save money for glasses. And he came back on the path out to the woods, and there was that beggar again on the ground. And he said, "Say, can you please help me? I am still so hungry." And Lo looked down at him, and he says, "I can't help you. I have no money," even though he did. And as he walked away, all of the light disappeared, and he was blind again. Well, Lo was so discouraged that they walked and walked and walked until they came to the big river that was almost overflowing because it was springtime, and the water was raging along the river. And as Lo comforted himself near a tree and settled into the grass, he heard a shout. "Help! Help me! Help!" And then there were men on the side of the river saying, "Look over there, that man is going down the river, and he's going to go over the falls." And somebody else said, "Well, can we help him?" And the first one said, No, he's just a tramp. Let him go. It's too dangerous out there to try to save him." Well, Lo couldn't believe it, and he said to the men, he yelled at them, "You need to help him." And the men said, No, he's too far gone. We'll never get him out of the river. Well, Lo was very close to the edge with Fan, and he turned to Fan and patted him and said, "Fan, go after the man." And Fan jumped into the river and swam as hard as he could and swam. And then the people on the side yelled, Look, that dog is trying to reach the man. It's no use. The dog will die too, and the man will survive only till he goes over the waterfall." But Fan kept swimming and swimming as hard as he could, and he finally reached the man, and with his little teeth he grabbed at the man's sleeve of his coat, and he began to tug the man, and it was a desperate tug because the river was flowing so fast. And little Fan was swimming with all of his little legs as fast as he could go. And it didn't look like he was going to make it to shore, but gradually he got closer and closer to shore until somebody pointed out a great big fact. They took the pole that Lo had used and they reached out with it, and the man grabbed the pole and they pulled him in. But little Fan, when he let go of the man's sleeve, was so tired, so exhausted, that he didn't have the strength to climb up onto the shore, and he was swept over the side of the falls. Lo was so desperately sad. He had lost his dear friend and companion, and the courage that Fan showed was so extraordinary, but as a result of that, Fan had lost his life. And so Lo went to sleep that night, crying and feeling so sad. He woke up the next morning, and the light from the sun was so bright, and he realized that his sight had come back completely. Because of Fan's sacrifice, he did the ultimate good deed, and he had his sight back. And as he looked out towards the river, he saw a man coming toward him. And as he got closer, he realized it was the man that Fan had saved from death. And the man started walking faster, and he said, "Are you the boy whose dog saved my life?" And Lo said, "Yes, sir, I was." But as the man got even closer, Lo realized that it was his father, the father who had thrown him out of the house when he was only 6 years old. And he got very, very angry, and he was about to yell at his father and curse him for what he did. And he stopped, and he realized that if he did that, it would be another bad deed and he'd lose his sight. And his father looked at him and said, Lo, you're my son, Lo. And he reached out and he grabbed him and hugged him tightly. And as they were hugging and as the tears came down Lo's face, somebody yelled at them both and said, "Hey, you over there, is this your dog?" And the man rushed up, and little old Fan, still bedraggled and wet, had been saved. And Father and Lo and Fan were together for the rest of their lives.